AITA for doubting my girlfriend's baby is mine after our 3-month break? When I met Claire, I had been so used to being alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be excited about someone. I was 29. I worked from home editing videos for ad campaigns, and my routine was exactly the same every day. Coffee, computer, gym, sleep, nothing else. She appeared at a strange moment in my life. I wasn't depressed, but I wasn't happy either. It was like living on autopilot. We met at the grand opening of a small craft brewery my friend Mark had dragged me to. I didn't even want to go. I remember I was sitting near the bar, looking at my phone, when I heard a voice behind me. "You were dragged here too." I turned and saw her smiling. She had on a simple dark dress. Her hair was tied back, and she had that calm expression of people who seem to observe everything before they speak. She wasn't the loudest woman in the place or the one drawing the most attention, but she had something that was hard to explain. Confidence, a natural air, as if she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. We ended up talking for almost the entire night. Claire worked in human resources for a pretty large tech company. She was smart, quick with her responses, and had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh even when I was trying to stay serious. After that night, we started dating. At first, it was intense. Endless text messages, late-night calls, impromptu dinners, weekend getaways to a small town a few hours away. It was that addictive feeling of discovering someone new and feeling like everything fits a little too perfectly. But the strange thing was that the relationship didn't fade when the initial excitement wore off. That's usually when the problems start. The routine, the fatigue, the small disappointments. With her, it was different. 2 years later, we were still working. Of course, we argued. She was proud, and I was too stubborn. There were days we could barely stand each other. But even in those moments, there was something solid between us. Or at least, I thought there was. We talked about moving in together, not as a distant fantasy, but as a real plan. We had already been browsing listings on Zillow, comparing rents, arguing absurdly about kitchen cabinet colors, and even joked about who would take up more closet space. I was convinced she was the person I was going to build my life with. That's why what happened that Thursday left me completely shattered. I finished work early that day. I bought sushi, a bottle of wine, and came home thinking it would be a quiet night. We had planned to look over some new apartment listings she had found. I remember that detail perfectly because I even cleaned the apartment before she arrived. I put on some music and turned on the small string lights on the patio. Everything seemed normal, until she opened the door. Claire walked in slowly, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. Not because she was sad, but because she was distant. It was the kind of cold expression someone has when they've already made a decision before they even get there. She didn't even kiss me. She set her purse on the chair and took a deep breath. "We need to talk." I felt my stomach sink. It's incredible how 4 words can completely change the air in a room. I tried to joke. That never ends well. She didn't smile. She sat across from me and folded her hands. "I need you to listen to everything before you react." That's when I understood this wasn't a normal argument. I sat down slowly. "Okay." For a few seconds, she stayed quiet, as if mentally organizing every sentence. And then she began. First, she talked about modern relationships, about how people confused love with possession. She said most couples lived out of fear, not freedom. At first, I thought it was just some philosophical conversation, but she continued. She said that for months she'd been feeling that traditional monogamy was an artificial construct, that many people ended up being unfaithful because no one is really prepared to connect with only one person for their entire life. I listened, not understanding where she was going, until she said something that sent a chill down my spine. Infidelity isn't always born from malice. I looked at her, confused. What? She remained calm. A lot of the time, it happens because something in the relationship broke long before. I felt an uncomfortable pressure in my chest. What are you trying to say? She looked down for a few seconds and then met my eyes again. Lately, I've been feeling attracted to other people. The sentence landed between us like a block of cement. I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at her. She kept talking with an unbearable calmness. She told me a new coworker made her feel alive again, that she liked talking to him, that there were moments when she imagined what it would be like to experience something with him. Every word hit me harder. The worst part wasn't the confession. It was the natural way she said it, as if she were explaining the weather, as if destroying me was part of a mature conversation. I haven't crossed a line with him, she clarified quickly. But I need to be honest with you. I could barely breathe normally. And why are you telling me this? Her answer made me feel sick. Because I love you too much to lie to you. I let out an empty laugh. How considerate of you. She ignored the comment. Then came the real blow. I need time. I felt my body tense up. Time for what? She took a deep breath. To understand what I really want. I looked at her in disbelief. Are you talking about breaking up? Not exactly. I hated that answer immediately. Not exactly. People always use those words when they want to destroy something without feeling guilty. Then she said what she really wanted. I want us to take a break. 3 months. I didn't speak. She continued. No pressure, no rules, without feeling trapped. I watched her in silence, but I already understood perfectly what that meant. You want to be with other people? Claire took too long to answer, and that silence was enough. I need to find out if what we have is still love or just habit. I felt a horrible mix of rage and humiliation because while she was talking about freedom and personal growth, all I heard was something else. I want to try new things, but I don't want to lose the security you give me. And then she confirmed exactly that. If after these months we still choose each other, it will mean that what we have is real. I stared at her. And in the meantime, I'm just supposed to wait for you while you decide if you can find something better? Her expression barely changed. Don't see it like that. Then how should I see it? She leaned toward me a little. As an opportunity for us to grow. I wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, I asked something much simpler. Has anything already happened with that guy? She shook her head quickly. No, but I didn't completely believe her. There was too much coldness in all of this. Too much preparation. No one comes into a conversation like that after a simple, innocent fantasy. Then she said something that finally broke me. I want you to wait for me. I looked at her, not understanding. Excuse me. I don't want to lose you. I just need to clear my head. That's when I understood everything. She wanted to explore the world while having a safe door left open in case anything went wrong. She wanted freedom without consequences. She wanted adventure with a guaranteed return ticket, and she expected me to accept that with a smile. I was quiet for several seconds, then I spoke slowly. If you walk out that door looking for other men, don't come back. Her face showed something like disappointment, as if my reaction was the problem, not what she had just asked of me. Are you reacting out of ego? I shook my head slowly. I'm reacting out of self-respect. Claire sighed, tired. She picked up her purse, stood up, and before leaving, she said a sentence I never forgot. Someday, you're going to understand that this was necessary for us. I didn't answer. I opened the door. She walked out, and the sound of it closing echoed through the entire apartment. I was left alone, staring at the set table, the untouched wine, and the open web pages with apartments for two. For the first time in years, I felt something terrible, that maybe I had never really known the woman I loved. The first few weeks after Claire left were much worse than I had expected. People often say things like, time heals all wounds, or you'll be fine, but no one talks about that initial phase where your brain just stops functioning normally. I kept working, answering emails, delivering projects, even going out to buy groceries, but I did it all like a machine. I slept poorly and ate worse. There were moments I completely forgot what day it was. The worst part came at night because that's when I'd replay the conversation over and over again. Her calm voice talking to me about freedom, about growth, about modern relationships, about how loving someone shouldn't mean exclusivity. Every time I remembered it, I felt something different. Sometimes rage, sometimes sadness, sometimes shame, because even though I tried to convince myself otherwise, a part of me kept wondering if I had failed in some way. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe the relationship had become routine. Maybe I stopped paying attention to her. You can know rationally that something isn't your fault and still torture yourself looking for mistakes. For almost 2 weeks, I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. I was embarrassed to explain it out loud because when you hear the story from the outside, it all sounds even more absurd. I finally ended up talking about it with Mark. We met at a coffee shop near his office on a Friday afternoon. As soon as he saw me, he knew something was wrong. You look like you've been through it, he said, sitting down across from me. And that's when I let it all out. I told him every detail. The conversation about monogamy, the coworker, the 3 months, the ridiculous request for me to wait for her. Mark listened without interrupting. He just slowly shook his head like someone trying to decide how much they can dislike a person who isn't even their ex. When I finished, he was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said something simple. She had already made her decision before she ever talked to you. I frowned. What do you mean? Nobody comes up with a speech that prepared overnight. That had been in her head for a while. And he was right. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Claire hadn't improvised that conversation. She had rehearsed it. She had probably spent weeks justifying it to herself so she wouldn't feel guilty. That was what hurt the most, not losing her, but realizing that while I was imagining a future together, she was already emotionally looking for the exit. After that talk, I slowly started to rebuild myself. Not in a dramatic way. There was no magical transformation. I simply started to occupy my mind. I took on more work projects. I went back to the gym with discipline. I picked up an old habit I had abandoned during the relationship, cycling on the weekends. I had always loved riding long routes on the trails outside the city. There was something therapeutic about pedaling for hours, listening only to the wind and your own breathing. With Claire, I had almost stopped doing it because she hated those outings. She said they were boring, that no one actually enjoyed waking up at 6 a.m. to get tired for 50 miles. So I ended up adapting to her routine, and without realizing it, I started giving up parts of myself to make room for someone else. Getting back on the bike felt strange at first, but also liberating. I started with short routes, then longer ones. I posted a few photos on my social media. Empty roads, mountains, hidden cafes and small towns, my bike leaning against absurdly peaceful landscapes. Nothing special, but it helped. Over time, something inside me changed. I thought about her less. I no longer checked her profile constantly, no longer imagined impossible conversations. I even started to enjoy being alone again, and that surprised me. For months, I had believed that losing Claire meant losing my entire future, but little by little, I understood something important. I didn't really miss the person she was. I missed the version of her that existed in my head. The real woman was someone else, and she had probably been someone else for a long time. Almost 3 months went by with no news from her. No texts, no calls, no reactions on social media, nothing. And honestly, I started to be grateful for it. Until that Sunday. I had left early for a pretty long ride outside the city. The weather was perfect, cool and sunny. It was the kind of morning where you feel like life has finally settled back into place. Halfway through the ride, I stopped at a small scenic overlook by the road. It was a popular spot for cyclists because it had benches, shade, and vending machines. I sat down to rest for a few minutes while I checked my phone. Then I heard a voice behind me. You still don't rest long enough. I felt an immediate shiver. I knew that voice perfectly. I turned around slowly. Claire was standing there. She was wearing light jeans, a light black jacket, and her hair was tied back. She looked almost the same as always. Almost. There was something different in her expression. Tiredness, maybe, or anxiety. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small smile. Hi. I stared at her without moving. What are you doing here? She shrugged slightly. I saw your posts. I figured you'd still be riding this route. That made me uncomfortable right away. There was something invasive about knowing she was watching me from a distance. What do you want, Claire? Her smile faded a little. To talk to you. I glanced at my bike. My first impulse was to leave immediately, but another part of me needed to hear why she had shown up after disappearing for 3 whole months. She sat down at a slight distance and took a deep breath. I've done a lot of thinking during this time. I didn't respond. And I was wrong. I watched her in silence. Claire looked down for a few seconds before continuing. I thought I needed space to understand myself, but I just ended up confusing everything. A bitter laugh rose in my throat. What a surprise. She ignored the comment. Then she looked up, directly at me. I want to get back together. The strangest part was my reaction. Nothing. I didn't feel happiness, or relief, or excitement. Just exhaustion. I looked at her for a few seconds before answering. No. Her expression changed immediately, as if she hadn't genuinely considered that possibility. What? I don't want to get back together with you. She blinked several times. Are you just reacting out of pride? I shook my head slowly. No. I just finally understand who you are. That seemed to annoy her. She moved a little closer. What we had was real. Maybe for me it was. Her face tensed. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to be losing control of the situation. And then something strange happened. She reached into her purse and took out a small white box. She placed it on the bench between us. I felt my heart stop for a second. It was a positive pregnancy test. I slowly raised my eyes to hers. Her eyes were wet. I'm pregnant. The world seemed to fall completely silent. I didn't speak. I didn't even know what to think. And then she added the sentence that made everything even worse. It's yours. I stared at her. She was expecting an immediate emotional reaction, but something much simpler happened in my head. I counted the time. Almost 3 months to the day since she had left. And something didn't add up because there was too much urgency in her eyes, too much desperation, too much fear. I felt a cold clarity spread through me. Do you really think I'm going to believe that? Her expression shattered instantly. I swear it is. I watched her without saying anything. Then she started to cry. I found out weeks after I left. I didn't know how to tell you. The story sounded improvised, clumsy, unstable, and she knew it. How many weeks are you? I asked. She hesitated for just a moment. Almost 3 months. That's when I knew for sure she was lying, because there was absolutely nothing about her that indicated such an advanced pregnancy. And more importantly, she was far too nervous for someone who supposedly had the truth on her side. I stared at her, and for the first time since she appeared, I felt something worse than anger. Pity. Claire was still crying in front of me, holding that pregnancy test as if it were a life raft. But something inside me had already changed too much. Months ago, I probably would have panicked. I would have tried to understand her, to find solutions, to believe her even if it all sounded absurd. Not anymore. Now, I just saw a desperate person trying to rebuild a sense of security that she herself had destroyed. I don't believe you, I said finally. Her breathing hitched. How can you say that? I looked her right in the eye. Because none of this makes any sense. She shook her head repeatedly. Yes, it does. No, Claire. You disappear for almost 3 months, come back suddenly, and show up pregnant, claiming it's mine. Did you seriously expect me not to ask questions? She looked down. For a few seconds, we sat in silence, listening only to the wind hitting the trees around the overlook. Then her tone changed completely. She no longer sounded calm or philosophical. Now she was scared. I need you to help me. That's when I understood everything. She hadn't come back for love. She had come back out of fear, because the fantasy of freedom was fun until real consequences appeared. I felt a disappointment so profound that even the anger vanished. Who's the father? I asked. She lifted her head immediately. I'm telling you it's you. Look me in the eyes and say it again. She did, but it barely lasted 2 seconds before she looked away again. And that was enough. I didn't need anything more. I stood up slowly. I'm leaving. She shot up as well. Please, don't do this. You already did, months ago. She tried to grab my arm. Listen to me. I pulled away immediately, and then something so ridiculous happened that even today, I can hardly believe it. Claire took a step back, put a hand to her forehead, and collapsed onto the ground. She literally fell to the ground in front of all the people who were resting nearby. For a second, I stood there frozen, staring at her, because it was too exaggerated to seem real. But the others didn't see it that way. A woman screamed. Oh my God! 2 people ran toward her immediately. Another man looked at me with an aggressive expression. What did you do to her? I felt my jaw tighten. Nothing. But it was too late. The scene was perfectly set. Her, crying, supposedly pregnant and fainted, and me, standing over her. In a matter of seconds, I had several people staring at me as if I were a monster. A woman started saying to call an ambulance. Another guy got too close. You'd better stay right here. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I knew perfectly well that Claire was faking. I could see it in small, absurd details. The tension in her jaw, the way she slightly moved her fingers when she thought no one was looking. But arguing there would only make things worse. The ambulance arrived fairly quickly, and to avoid problems, I ended up going with them to the hospital. The entire trip was surreal. Claire lying there, feigning weakness, the paramedics asking questions, people looking at me as if I were responsible for something. And me, sitting in silence, feeling like I was in a cheap, ridiculous version of my own life. When we got to the hospital, they took her in immediately for tests. I stayed outside, leaning against a white wall, trying to process everything. An hour ago, I was peacefully cycling, thinking about lunch. Now I was waiting for medical results for a woman who already seemed like a stranger. I don't know how much time passed before a doctor came out. Are you here with the patient? I nodded. The doctor glanced at a chart before speaking. The pregnancy is positive. I didn't react. I already figured as much. But then he added something that made the whole situation even more absurd. Based on her hormone levels, we estimate she's between 3 and 5 weeks pregnant. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. 3 to 5 weeks. Not 3 months. Not even close. The doctor continued explaining that they would do more tests to confirm it exactly, but I was barely listening because everything had just clicked into place perfectly. She wasn't confused. She hadn't miscalculated. She had lied, and she had done it hoping I would accept the story without questioning it. When they finally let me in to see her, Claire was sitting on the examination table with a pale expression. As soon as she saw me, she spoke quickly. The tests are wrong. I watched her for several seconds. Of course. I swear they are. Her voice was trembling, but I no longer felt any compassion, only exhaustion. I approached slowly. You are the most disingenuous person I have ever met. The color drained from her face immediately. She tried to speak, but I continued before she could. You talked to me about free love, about personal growth, about mature relationships. You gave me an entire speech on emotional honesty while you were planning to destroy everything without feeling guilty. The tears started falling again. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. For the first time, I raised my voice slightly. You wanted to do whatever you wanted while keeping me waiting as a backup in case something went wrong. Claire started crying harder, but it was too late for that. And now you show up pregnant, trying to convince me the child is mine because you need to fix the mess you made. I'm scared. Of course you're scared. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then I spoke more slowly. You know what the worst part is? You're still trying to manipulate me, even now. She quickly shook her head. I'm not manipulating you. I looked her directly in the eyes. You fainted in front of everyone because you knew exactly how that situation would look. She didn't answer, and that silence confirmed everything. She took a shaky breath before finally breaking down completely. I don't know what to do. That's when she stopped acting. I noticed it right away. She was no longer trying to seem strong, or modern, or evolved. Now she was just a terrified person facing the consequences of her decisions. She covered her face with her hands and started talking through her tears. It all came out jumbled, fragmented, but it was enough to understand the whole story. During those months, she had started going out constantly with new people, parties, gatherings, and impromptu trips. She wanted to feel free, desired, and alive. And one night, things got out of hand at a party with some new people, and she made a series of poor decisions. When she said that, I felt a strange emptiness. Not jealousy, not pain, just utter disbelief. She didn't even know who the father could be. There were several possibilities. And then I understood why she had come looking for me. I was the safe option. The stable man, the one with a steady job, the one who would probably try to be responsible. Claire looked up, her eyes full of tears. Please, help me. I watched her in silence. Months ago, I would have done anything for her. Now, I barely recognized the person sitting in front of me. I picked up my cycling helmet from the chair, walked toward the door, and behind me, I heard her broken voice. You're just going to leave that easily? I paused for a few seconds without turning around. Then I answered with something I had been understanding for a long time. It wasn't easy when you left. I just learned to live with it. I opened the door and walked out of the room. When I left the hospital, the cold afternoon air hit me right in the face. For the first time in a long time, my head felt completely clear. Not happy, not euphoric, just calm, as if something that had been rotting for months had finally finished breaking. I walked to where I had left my bike and stood for a few seconds, motionless, looking at the gray sky over the city. It was all over. And the strangest thing was that I had no desire to go back and fix anything. Claire had become an unrecognizable person long before that conversation in my apartment. I had simply refused to see it. As I slowly pedaled my way home, I understood something important. Often, you don't lose the person you love. You lose the illusion you built around them. And those are two very different things. The following weeks were strange. Claire tried to contact me several times. First, long messages, then calls, then crying voice notes. I didn't answer a single one. At first, I felt guilty for ignoring her. Not because I wanted to get back with her, but because a part of me still remembered the woman I fell in love with. But that version didn't exist anymore, or maybe she never really did. Mark was the one who finally pulled me out of that mental spiral for good. One night, we were having beers at his apartment when he asked me something simple. If you met Claire today, from scratch, knowing everything you know now, would you date her? The answer came out on its own. No. He nodded. Then you don't miss her. You miss the idea of who you thought she was. That sentence put a lot of things into place in my head, because he was right. I was still clinging to old memories, to happy moments, to plans that no longer existed. But the problem was that I was in love with a past version of someone who had completely changed. After that, I decided to cut off all contact. I blocked her number, her social media, and even deleted photos I still had on my phone. Not out of hatred, but because I needed to truly close that door. And slowly, I started to feel free again. I began traveling more. I took on new projects, met different people, and even ended up making friends with several cyclists I saw frequently on my weekend routes. One of them, Dylan, organized long rides every month, and I started joining the group. It was thanks to that I met Megan. The first time we talked, I didn't even think much of her. She was wearing a huge sweatshirt. Her hair was a mess from her helmet, and she was complaining because she had gotten a flat tire halfway through the ride. Nothing cinematic, nothing perfect. And maybe that's why it felt real from the beginning. Megan wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't talk as if she had discovered the emotional secrets of the universe. She didn't need to turn every conversation into a theory about freedom or personal evolution. She was simply honest, direct, and calm. With her, things flowed effortlessly, and that scared me more than I expected. After Claire, I had gotten used to distrusting everything, to analyzing every gesture, every silence, every change in attitude. Megan noticed that pretty quickly. One afternoon, while we were having coffee after a long ride, she asked me directly, "Who hurt you so badly?" I gave an uncomfortable laugh. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled slightly. "Only people who've been really disappointed look at everything like they're waiting to be betrayed." That sentence hit me harder than I imagined. Because it was true. Claire hadn't just destroyed the relationship. She had also affected the way I looked at others. And I understood that if I didn't fix that, I would end up becoming a cold and distrustful person forever. So I started to really work on myself. Not to get anyone back, not to prove anything, but just because I was tired of living trapped in something that was already over. Several more months passed. One Saturday morning, I received a message from an unknown number. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to apologize." I didn't have to ask who it was. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I blocked the number without replying. Not because I was still angry, but because there was nothing left to talk about. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening a door. Sometimes it just means letting go of the weight and keep walking. That night, I went out for a ride by myself. The road was almost empty, and the wind was strong. As I pedaled on, I remembered something my mother told me months before, when I was still a wreck. People show you who they really are when they have to choose between what they want and what's right. At the time, I didn't fully understand the sentence. Now I did. Claire chose impulse, immediate gratification, the fantasy of living without consequences. And when reality finally showed up, she wanted to come running back to the safe place she had abandoned. But life doesn't work that way. Decisions have weight, and some doors only close once. I kept pedaling as the distant lights of the city appeared before me. And for the first time since this whole story began, I understood something simple. Losing Claire wasn't the tragedy I had imagined. The real tragedy would have been staying with someone capable of destroying everything and then calling it freedom. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.